This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Whale. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the narrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, the culture and the history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan. I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 246 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we begin a new chapter of a new series of adaptations from a new source of folklore. This is the story of the Death Spancel. But before I get down to that, very big welcome to any new and returning listeners. Thank you so much for your recent or continued support. You can follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. You can email me at thefiresidebard.com. Say that again, at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. How many times have I done that? Or you can support the podcast directly by joining Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com, where for as little as €5 a month, although you can pay more if you want, you can gain access to bonus material, not just for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network. And the final way you can support the podcast is, of course, you can buy my book, Garden Sea, A Neo-Myth of Home, available in paperback from the Headstuff website or available instantly over Kindle. That might be the quickest. I've got all of the housekeeping and the little bits of business out of the way. It is really nice to be recording again. This is the third episode I've recorded since I've been back, and the third I'm releasing this week, because as I am recording this, it is going into Halloween, and Halloween being the most folklorific time of the year, and because there had been a long absence, it felt right to restart with a bang, get back into the swing of things. After this episode, we're going to go back to the usual of an episode being released every Wednesday. But thank you for so many. I've received so many nice messages and emails and comments since I came back. It's really, really encouraging to know that the listenership of Fireside has still been out there and the people have been continuing to listen to old episodes. It really does mean the world to me, and it makes it feel all the better to be back. It feels like there's a part of me that feels whole again doing this. Thank you also for your patience in some of the technical challenges that I've had, because I'm recording this in a new format now, using new equipment. I'm in a new location. I'm in London, so I'm in a different kind of sound environment, using new microphone and recording directly into a camera to have more footage to put up. So there was a big jump between the first episode I released this week. Only when I was editing it did I notice it had this kind of like old-timey radio sound to it, which turns out was because I was using too much noise reduction on the camera itself. This is very nitty-gritty technical stuff that maybe isn't of an interest to people, but I did want to explain in case people noticed a jump in the fidelity between the last two episodes. Because I need a noise limiter, because I'm not recording in a recording studio. I'm recording in a small flat in Camden, and London having one of the best public transport systems in the world, it means there are buses going by my window every 2 minutes throughout the night. So I do need some way of treating that sound. But turns out I'd done it too much that it was compromising. So this seems to be a happy minimum, or a happy medium right here, where it's blocking out a lot of the outside sounds, but it still has that warmth that I ideally want. So I thank you for your patience in that, and I hope you have noticed the difference, so that we can always make the podcast the best quality it can be. I'm very excited to be beginning a new series of stories, because the book that these next good few stories are going to come from. Most of the stories in the next few months is from a book called Celtic Weird. I'm showing up now for anyone who's watching it, which is relatively recent. Came out in the last 5 years. I think 2022 it came out. It was edited by a writer named Johnny Mains or Johnny Mans. Apologies if he's out there. I must find out for sure how you pronounce that. But what I liked about this, I discovered this book in one of my first few weeks living over here. There was this incredible bookshop along Regent's Canal called Word on the Water, which is on a barge. It's on an old Dutch barge that is permanently moored in Regent's Canal, and you step down onto the boat, and it is just the most stunning bookshop. Anyone who lives in London or anyone who's visiting and is around King's Cross station, I highly recommend walking along the canal and checking out the Word on the Water. And this book did just jump right out at me, because I always noticed that incredible, that dark emerald forest green kind of colour that so many of the books look like, with that gold writing that so many of the books I've used for Fireside over the years all had that same look, that kind of magic spellbook look. And the thing that really jumped out to me is, first of all, it wasn't a book that I had encountered before, possibly because it was published by the British Library. So it is an English publication, which is rare, naturally, of Irish folklore. But as I had said in last week's episodes, that what I really liked about it is that it covers all of the insular Celtic cultures. So it has aspects of Cornish and Manx, as well as to go along with the Welsh and the Brittany and Ireland and Scotland, because it's great to discover new Irish and Scottish stories that are more in keeping with what Fireside has always been built around. But then it's really, really interesting to see other very similar, and some cases almost identical cultures. I was looking at footage of people speaking in the Manx language on the Isle of Man, and it is so similar to the Irish language that it has its differences, and I'm sure it's different written down, but when I was watching this person speaking it, I was following a good deal of it and seeing all of the similarities. So with that in mind, you can only imagine how similar a lot of the folklore would be, and it's really exciting to explore that. But the episode we're going to start with this week is, of course, an Irish tale. And this felt really grassroots, getting back to the origins of Fireside. This comes from this book, and the story was originally composed by a writer named Catherine Tynan, who wrote over 100 novels and hundreds of poems and short stories, an incredibly prolific writer of the later 19th and early 20th century. A Dubliner, very much a contemporary of Oscar Wilde and W.B. Yeats. And this was one of her short stories that actually came from a folklore source and also as a true story she had heard. And it being Halloween, this is a dark tale. A lot of the stories in this book, with a name like Celtic Weird, as you would suggest, go to pretty dark places, but it is a really, really interesting tale. I hope you enjoy my version of it. We will chat more afterwards. This is the tale of the Death Spancel on Fireside. The Death Spancel. High in the rafters of the local church, there hung a curious, rare, and evil specimen. It had no business being in a chapel. It had no business being in a brothel, much less a house of God. Nonetheless, there it hung, an ominous warning to those who dared to make a deal with the devil. Sir Robert Molyneux was as handsome as he was ruthless. As a powerful landlord in old Ireland, he held dominion over numerous poor families. He drank and he gambled and he extorted anyone who would benefit his vices. And the only thing he enjoyed more than evictions and raising rent was the company of women. He had gained a horrific reputation for charming, manipulating, and extorting his female tenants. There was even the story of the young woman who he had forced to leave Ireland, carrying his unwanted, unborn child to be raised fatherless on the streets of New York. So when word spread around that Sir Molyneux was to marry the daughter of Lord Dunlow, people were shocked. The Dunlows were a respected Irish family, and Lady Eva was said to be kind-hearted and generous to all who met her. But the tenants thought that if Sir Robert settled and was married to a good woman, perhaps he too would become softer, kinder, and that they in turn would feel less of their landlord's wrath. And it did work for a time. When Sir Robert was in the company of Lady Eva, all thoughts of his previous life went from him. To look into her eyes was to see only good in this world, and it encouraged Robert to want to do and be better. He did not drink, gamble, or womanize, but that, unfortunately, was only when he was with his future bride. And for all of Lady Eva's benevolent qualities, she did not know everything about her prospective husband. And some of the stories she heard, she dismissed out of hand as gossip. Perhaps she feared that they might be true. It was 2 weeks before they were to be married that Sir Robert went out hunting with a friend. The stag party, so to say. They spent the entire morning, afternoon, and early evening in pursuit of a particularly wily fox. And when the hunt was done, Sir Robert was too tired to ride all the way back to his own estate of Rossiter, so his friend invited Robert to drink, feast, and rest in his home. Oh, but for that elusive fox, and Sir Robert may have been saved. Full of the adrenaline of the hunt, Sir Robert drank and ate that night, and thoughts of his future wife went from him. Soon the servants of his friend started to look more and more attractive. He was a weak man when it came to women beneath his class. Sir Robert walked down the stairs and passed a dark-eyed girl, whom he grabbed around the waist. It was something he had done and that had worked many times before. "What's your name?" "Maureen Hollian," the girl said shyly. Robert brushed aside her dark hair and caressed her face before leaning in to kiss her. When suddenly the girl pushed him away and ran off into the shadows of the house. Feeling defeated, but also exhausted, Sir Robert went up to bed. What inspired Dark Maureen, as she came to be known, to visit the graveyard that night? Had she heard tell of the misdeeds of Sir Robert Molyneux? Did she want to punish him or safeguard herself? And where did she hear of the terrible ritual she was about to perform? A criminal had been hanged and buried that very day. The earth was fresh, and Maureen was strong with intent. She dug up the grave and peeled away the lid of the coffin. There, the hanged man with the broken neck lay, at peace after his brutal death. Maureen took a knife from her pocket and carefully sliced a strip of skin from head to toe off the hanged man. It was crucial the skin remained intact. Dark Maureen peeled off the line and wrapped it like the rope of the winch of a horse, a spancel, as they were known. Then the young woman returned to the home, went into the room of Sir Robert Molyneux, and laid the spancel across his knees. Sir Robert had horrifying dreams that night, unaware of the ghastly thing that lay upon him. The next morning he awoke with a clear and woozy head, keen to leave this place and return home to his beloved Eva. But when he went to untie his horse, the beast was weak and sick. It could barely stand. "Some illness has crippled my poor steed," said Sir Robert. So he arranged for a carriage to take him home. "Show us the meaning of haste, and I will give you a half-sovereign," he said to the driver. The horses pelted along the rocky road back to Rossiter, and Sir Robert thought only of the face of Lady Eva. He was not totally without conscience, and saw her as his redemption, but he had now become acutely aware of his own weaknesses. "I will never leave her again," he told himself, for Eva made Robert want to be a better man. But the farther they went from the estate, and the closer to home, the worse Sir Robert felt. He began to sweat, and his heart throbbed. He threw himself around the carriage and cried in pain. "Faster!" Robert shouted up. The driver above did not know what was wrong with his passenger, but dutifully obeyed. Robert soothed himself with the thoughts of his beloved. He would be better when she was in his arms. But the more he tried to focus on Lady Eva, the more he was consumed with the thoughts of another. The servant girl he had met the night before, Maureen Hollian. He did not know why, but the closer he got to home, the more Lady Eva's face dimmed from his mind's eye, and the more he could only see Maureen. This must just be his illness. He was delirious and hallucinating. But just as Rossiter came into view, Sir Robert could not think of Eva any more. He could not remember what she looked like, or even who she was. He called up to the driver, "Back, back, from whence we came. Do it in under an hour, and I will give you a full sovereign." The driver was naturally incredibly confused. His passenger was either mad or drunk, but still he did as he was told. He pulled the reins, halted the horses and turned them around, and even faster than they were already going, returned to the other estate. And sure enough, the closer he got to Dark Maureen, the better Sir Robert felt. There had never been any other woman, any other person he had thought of in this way. He did not know why, but he had to be with her, and only her. About a mile from his friend's home, Robert felt it. "Stop! Halt!" he cried, and the driver obeyed. There, by the road, was a woman wrapped in a shawl. It was Maureen. "I walked out to meet you." "How did you know I would come?" "I knew you would have to." Robert lifted Maureen into the carriage, threw a gold and silver piece up to the driver and said, "Back to Rossiter, and be done with it." The carriage driver completed his command, and never forgot the events of that day for the rest of his life. Sir Robert Molyneux was never seen in public again. He never went out drinking, gambling, or hunting. The day of his wedding to Lady Eva came and went without word, and certainly without a groom. Lord Dunlow rode to Rossiter himself for an explanation to this outrageous disrespect, but the door was locked to him. Lady Eva never married out of sorrow and shame, and her father took her away from Ireland, away from the gossip and opinions, and left his castle in the care of his servants. Sir Robert Molyneux was responsible for one more poor woman leaving her homeland. and Sir Robert himself handed over control of his estate to his solicitor. And while the landlord himself was never seen again, his wrath was still felt. If any tenants missed their rent, the roof was torn off their cottage and the entire family was thrown into a ditch. Soon, it even became too much for the servants in his home. The phantom-like man Sir Robert had become, and the dark-eyed mistress with whom he lived in sin, drove all the household staff to quit and take their chances elsewhere. Just one servant remained. A Frenchman, who lived with his wife on the estate. He was not as easily spooked as his Irish colleagues. They became the sole custodians of Rossiter, and essentially kept their lord alive. Years passed, until people began to doubt that Sir Robert had ever returned to Rossiter. The house was in complete disrepair, the garden overgrown, with shattered windows. There was no light from a fire, no sign at all of life within. The wife of the Frenchman went to the local chapel and beseeched the young Father Hugh to come to Rossiter. She told him that both Sir Robert and Maureen were close to death, and despite their past, she feared for their everlasting souls. So Father Hugh made the journey up to the estate through the wild and untamed grass and was let inside by the Frenchman. Upstairs he found Sir Robert Molyneux weak in bed and dark Maureen thrashing on the floor. The priest knew that this was the work of the followers of Lucifer. He looked in horror at the belt dark Maureen wore. He had heard of this ritual, but had never conceived someone might perform it. "You have a death spancel upon you," the priest said. "Yes," said dark Maureen, "and it has bound him to me, and only me, all these years. This is a tool of Satan. Give it to me, and repent. Repent for the sake of your everlasting soul." "Never. I will never give it up." The priest begged by the screaming woman's side. He prayed to God to save her, but Maureen still refused. And when the last breath was gone from her, dark Maureen remained unrepentant. Father Hugh tore the death spancel from the dead woman and threw it across the room, for fear he too would be corrupted by its power. He then went over to the bed where Sir Robert looked at peace. He began to cry and begged the Lord's forgiveness for all his past crimes. Father Hugh administered the last rites, and Sir Robert Molyneux died, finally free. And Father Hugh took the death spancel and, against all objection, hung it high in the rafters of the chapel. When he gave his sermons and spoke of the everlasting fire, he gestured to the strip of dead skin above, a constant warning and a reminder of the perils of desire, jealousy, and vengeance. The end. And that is the tale of the Death Spancel on Fireside. As you can see, yes, I'm sure you'll agree, dark, dark stuff. For several reasons. First of all, when a story is in any way based on a true story or reported to be true, that naturally lends it a little bit more gravitas, even though it still is a severely supernatural story. And then also because, despite this very dark supernatural element, there is something incredibly grounded in this tale. we've had a good few stories over the years on Fireside about landlords, which always feel particularly potent for anyone who is renting in most places in the world now, in this kind of neo-feudalist world that we live in. So there always, for any fellow renters out there, there is always an added potency when these wicked landowners and landlords are presented in what would have been a post-famine Ireland, which was such a disastrous time for most people in Ireland, but a tremendous time to own property, and for evictions and debt and pawn shops. Pawn shops were hugely successful during the famine. And so there's that basis to begin with, and then the fact that we have this very wicked man in Sir Robert Molyneux, not just being a landlord, but being this predator upon young women, something which of course is all too potent and relevant. And we are presented with this story that is a comeuppance of sorts for Sir Robert, but that isn't how the story goes, curiously. And there was definitely a part of me that considered changing that element, because I kept a lot of the elements similar. I think I just changed the framing of the story a little bit. In the original version, Catherine Tynan presents exactly what the Death Spancel is at the beginning of the story, whereas I liked the idea more of revealing it throughout. And I added a little bit more detail to it, in terms of we didn't see originally like where she got it from. And I looked into, I'd never heard of this thing. As when I think of Spancel, like a lot of Irish people will think of the Christy Moore song Spancel Hill, but I didn't really know it in its connotation of being used like to tie up animals, like usually specifically horses. So that was the word spancel, being such an unusual word, was definitely what first grabbed me to the story. And you put death in front of an unusual world, you're going to get probably an interesting story. And it certainly is that. And we're introduced to Dark Maureen, and it almost seems like we're going to get this kind of a feminine revenge tale, that this is what Sir Robert gets for all of his mistreatment of women, and that he is going to be cursed by this object of the devil. And of course that is what happens. It does torment him, and the tragedy is in the fact that Sir Robert is engaged to this benevolent woman and this good person who potentially could have had a much better life with someone else, but then does not get that happy ending either, because this is, 19th century Ireland, and that would be your husband leaving you and never contacting you again would of course been a massive source of shame for your family. And the fact that we get that detail that Lady Eva didn't marry again. But of course, Lord Molyneux, Sir Robert, he becomes ensnared. So the idea of this death spancel that I discovered was, yes, not always, but usually it had to be from a corpse, and ideally a fresh corpse. And usually it would be from a criminal. But maybe that just helped with the morality of doing something so gruesome, in that you were desecrating a grave. But I guess if you're going to that place, you're already doing something that is cursed and is the work of the devil. So perhaps that is less of concern when you're already gone that far. But the true tragedy at the end of it is that it is Dark Maureen who ends up suffering the most, because Sir Robert is saved, because he's released and he repents. But Dark Maureen, and I suppose you could phrase it in one way, that she had given herself totally over to the dark side and to the devil and to the occult, that it would have been hypocritical of her, and it benefited her massively. And she did get to live this entire life with this promiscuous lord completely under her control, to the point where everyone else, any other member of his staff, abandoned the property, and that he was thought dead to everyone else. But I guess so. In a way, she died without any regret whatsoever, because to have repented at the end, knowing her life was about to come to an end, would have been hypocritical on the life that she had incredibly enjoyed. Whereas once Robert is released from this spell, he has this immense regret for the life that was taken out of his hands, and the life that he took away from other women's hands, in that detail of the at least one woman who was forced to leave the country and to raise the unwanted child in New York. But this still being a story written at a very massively Catholic time in Ireland, there still is the Catholic slant and the morality there, that the repentance is the key. And any aspects of folklore or superstition or paganism will, of course, all be looped in with the devil and anything that is not divine and in worship of God. So, of course, it makes sense from this priest's point of view that he would get both of them to repent and pray for both of their souls. But if the soul does not repent, there is only so much that the priests themselves can do. And we do have this image that bookends the story, that of the Death Spancel being hung in the church and hanging up there in the rafters, which is just an incredible image and a great way of circling back, and something kind of gruesome is the word that comes to my mind again. Ghoulish, that's the word. Ghoulish, that about hanging this literal piece of flayed dead flesh from a hanged man in a church is, you know, that is, as the book it came from called it, that is Celtic weird right there. And that's the kind of, I like having stories like that. I definitely don't exclusively like the gruesome and the grim, which a lot of folklore books now are like. I think there are more folklore stories that lean towards the gothic, I guess because people do like ghost stories and horror stories. That's never been as much the kind of stuff that I've really sought out. Naturally, you encounter a huge amount of it, and I've gotten a lot more into it. I suppose, like with anything, like why Irish folk music is my favourite genre of music to play, is because I think Irish folk covers every kind of range of song. So like Irish folk can be uproariously hilarious, incredibly tragic, it can be slow and fast. There's no subject matter or no tone that seems inappropriate to me in Irish folk. I just think there's a great expanse to it that you'd never be bored, and there's such variety in it, in what potentially could be quite a limited form, because it is folk music, so it is mostly acoustic or with limited instrumentation. And I think that really holds true with Irish folklore mythology as well, in that it has this massive range where it can be the most gruesome thing, or it can be really, really funny and really light or really silly. And I guess I like having that full range rather than preferencing one or the other. My favorite thing is that you can go from something last week like The Wondrous Child, which would have been written at a very similar time, within the same 5-10 years of each other, and come from the same world of folklore, that one can be quite innocuous and innocent and sweet and almost serene, and that this one can be like really grounded and dark and really from the bowels of something. Because I'm reminded of something that the writer in Video SS, Lindsay Ellis, one of my big inspirations, that she said about Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, both in the novel and then in the Disney adaptation, is why Frollo is the most terrifying Disney villain, and why Hellfire is such a strong villain song, is because Frollo is real. There are aspects of Jafar and Ursula and Scar and all of those that still feel more fantastical, because either they're, you know, a different kind of being or a different animal, or it's more magical, whereas Frollo is completely grounded and is a predator as well. And I think that is, anytime there's something, doesn't matter how old the story is, that feels like it could be relevant still today, I think that's what makes it still feel really potent and really urgent, and also does justify why we do tell these old stories and why they do deserve another bit of life. Because if there's nothing we can connect with, some people look for complete escapism, you know, that they don't want anything, but I think we will always need something that grounds us a little bit so that we can hang on to. And those should be good things as well. We should see positive aspects, but we also should see like real things as well. At least that's what I think, and that's why I think this story was a really interesting one. But of course, I want to hear what you think in any aspect of the podcast, as always. As I get back on my feet, although I really feel I'm starting to get back in the swing of it, which is nice. I think it was a great idea to do these 3 in this week, so I really feel confident again. As again, when you're taking a gap from anything, like it gets harder and harder to start back to it. I describe writing anything as it's like going to the gym or going running. You know, if you could have been going to the gym every day for months or been running every day, and then you stop for a little while because of work or just one thing or another, and then it gets harder and harder to start again. But once you do, you get it back quite quickly. It's even like getting text messages that you just miss, and you're like, I mean to reply to that, and then the anxiety just builds and builds and gets harder and harder to message back. That, in a microcosmic way, that is what it is like to restart something like this. But it feels so good and so rewarding to get back into the podcast and to be recording and writing and editing it every week. And I was always going to feel a bit rusty, but I feel I'm starting to get back into the swing of it now. Hope you think so too. But do let me know. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram @firesidebard. Tell your friends about the podcast. Tell them that we're back. So it's never been a better time to check it out. Buy my book, Garden Sea and Neo-Myth of Home, available in paperback and head stuff. Next week, we will have another story from Celtic Weird. This is actually a Breton folktale. I believe it is, will be 247 next week. Yes, next week we have something that I don't think we really ever covered on Fireside, which we have a story about werewolves. Not really werewolves in Irish mythology, but we have a Breton folktale tale from Brittany that is called The Werewolves and the Other Side, which I'm really looking forward to sharing to you. So I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Head Stuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.